This is a walkthrough of activity 5-4, implementing standard NTFS permissions. Okay, and we're going to deviate from the book a little bit because it's not accurate. And when I get to that point, I'll show you. So first thing we want to do is we want to access our second hard drive. Mine is E, the book says D, but it's the second hard drive. And we want to create a folder. We want to call it test. And we want to look at the security tab for the folder we just created. We're not looking at sharing because we're not going to make a share. We're going to look at the security tab. So we're looking at the raw NTFS permissions, and these are the standard permissions down here. And as we browse through, you'll notice that they change. You'll also notice that they're grayed out. And why is that? That is because these permissions were inherited from the parent object, which is the drive, and that's what we're going to look at next. So if we go up in our hierarchy to the parent of this object, which is the E drive, and we look at security, we'll see now that they're no longer grayed out, because as a parent and as really the root of all of this, anything that's created in E is going to inherit these basic permissions. And you're going to notice that these groups, with the exception maybe one or two, that will change, but we can add, we can change, we can modify at this point. Once we create an object, a child object under that, we will not be able to change anything because these permissions have been inherited from as the child from the parent object. So looking, we notice that we cannot change. We're now on number 3. Number 4, we want to add at the root, which is the root object, which is the E drive. We want to add Maura Cohen. Check the name, we see that it's a valid account, and we're only going to give her read level permissions from the standard NTFS permissions. Double check that, apply, and now we're going to look at the test folder, our test object, and we see that Maura Cohen has rolled down. We cannot change it, and we've given her read. So that's just to show you how when you make changes to a parent object, if there is inheritance, and that inheritance exists by default, it's going to roll down to all the child objects. Anything we create under here is also going to inherit objects from anything previously up in the hierarchy. So we want to now add on the test folder, we want to add a group to this, marketing users. And there's our marketing users, and you notice we can edit the object. We can edit this the permissions for this assignment in the discretionary access control list. The book talks about DACLs. ACL is just access control list. You find that in routers. You find that anywhere where security is concerned. Who's allowed, what they're allowed to do. And it's called discretionary because we can change it. Non-discretionary would be the root assignments when we create the disk. Those are the standard groups and the standard permissions that are set. We can go back and tweak those, but by default it'll just inherit certain ones from the file system from when we set up a new drive or whatever. Okay, so we've created that, and just as a refresher, when we come here and look at E, you notice that marketing users is not in there. So we want to get into our test object, and we want to create a new object, a file object called NTFS test. And we want to look at the permissions again. You notice that we have lost the ability to list files and folders because this is a file object. It's not a folder. Folders and files have slightly different attributes. Folders will contain file objects or other folders, But because this is a file object, you of course do not have a directory, you don't have a list of things underneath it. It's its own separate object. It doesn't contain other objects, and it's not linked to them. So we notice here we've again inherited files and folders. I mean, we've inherited from Moira, the read-only. We've inherited marketing groups, and the book says in part 10 it wants us to try to remove users. Well, it's grayed out. We can't change it. That's an indication. We say remove, and it gives us a failure. It gives us the security prompt that says we can't because these rights have been inherited. So what do we do? We can break inheritance. It tells us on 11 the advanced button, which is right here. This is how you get to the advanced security settings, and you notice everything is inherited from something above. If we uncheck allow inheritance, it's going to give us that warning, and it's going to ask us what do we want to copy. Well, we're going to copy the permissions. If we say remove, it's going to completely clear out these permissions. It will have no inheritance and therefore no rights assigned. So we want to copy for this file object NTFS test, and we no longer have inheritance. And we're going to say OK. Now we have the ability to change, whereas before we didn't. And we want to go back and we want to remove users. And we say remove, and we've removed it because inheritance has been broken. This is not an orphaned object per se. We still have permissions, but this would be an example where we may have orphaned permissions. There are examples where you copy files and the permissions aren't copied over, or the SIDs don't exist, and this would almost qualify as that, except these users do exist. It recognizes them. It just means that it's orphaned from inheritance, but not from permissions from the SID, from the SAM per se. Okay. So we've copied our permissions over, and now that we've removed, what we want to do now is we want to log out, and we want to log in as Moira Cohen, and we want to try to add things to this folder, and you're going to see where we actually can. The book is going to say you cannot, but we can, and I'll explain why. Remember, we've created this in a previous example. M. Cohen, she is part of marketing users. She's also part of users. Password was password01. We've logged in. We want to go to our My Computer, go to our test folder, and it says to attempt to create an object in the test folder, and we want to create another object. And we'll say Moira test. We were able to create it, and let's say editing this document. Say save, and you notice that we've got some text in there, and if we open it, it has saved our changes. So that begs the question, why? By the book, it says that you shouldn't be able to write anything into this folder. The reason you can is because of effective permissions. And so we'll log out, we'll log back in as administrator. This is covered in the next example, but this is just to show you the interplay of how group assignments, users attached to certain, assigned as members of certain groups, give permissions. Windows NT based operating systems, so NT4.0, 2000, 2003, and 2008, go by a rule of nowadays of least access. So the more restrictive the permissions, but you must remember that it's the cumulative permissions, the cumulative assignments of groups and the rights to those groups. So if we go back in here, we notice we have it. If we say test, we can say properties, we can say security, we can say advanced, and effective permissions. So looking at this object, we can say Moira. She has all of these permissions. She has traverse the folder, list folders, read attributes. She has all of these. So she has the ability to write. How would we change that? We would have to break inheritance once again at this level in order to match the book. Just like we removed users before, we say remove users there, and we also say remove marketing users. And if we go back now and say properties, security, advanced, and we say Moira, effective rights, she only has the ability to list now. Notice there is a change. She can't create anything, and she can only list. So if we log it back in at this point, as Moira, you'll notice that now she does not have the ability to write. So that's just something to remember when you're doing, and I'll show you, when you're doing assignments to groups and you're setting those permissions. It's good to have that tool to check effective permissions to ensure that you're accomplishing what you're trying to do. Because if there's a group, unless you have two abilities, you can allow or you can deny. If you explicitly deny the ability of a user to do something, they won't be able to do it. And it doesn't matter if the group that they're part of is allowed. That user, if it's explicitly denied, will not be allowed. So that's the cumulative effect. But if it's not assigned, or if it's allowed only partially here, but more rights are allowed in a group that they're part of, it'll be the sum total, so all the rights that they're allowed. That's what it means by effective permissions. So Moira's logged in. Let's try to add a file. Access is denied because she only has read and list privileges. If we try to, we can open this so we can read it, but if we try to edit this again, notice we could. That's because this object, when we broke permissions, she does still have permissions to do everything based upon, because she's the creator owner. And that's another little thing the book doesn't really discuss, is if you are the creator owner, you do have full rights to that. So even though we've taken away her assignments and therefore her rights to add anything, the object that does currently exist that she's created, that she has full permissions to as creator owner. So I just wanted to kind of throw that out there to remember that there are a couple extra things. Creator owner is an attribute that every file has by the creator. If I were to take that away, just like we did before, I could break inheritance on this object, and I could take away those rights. I wouldn't be able to take away the rights myself as creator owner, but if I did as administrator, then she wouldn't be able to edit those files either. That's how you're able to access files on a network but not be able to edit them, is by restricting via groups or whatever, and only allowing those read permissions. That's what this book was trying to demonstrate, but it kind of sort of deviated. This concludes our walkthrough of Activity 5-4, implementing standard NTFS permissions.